Good morning, Dan and Amy. We're coming to you live from Charles Equipment Energy Systems in Des Plaines, part of our AM 560 Signature Bank Business Tour. And Amy, this is a really interesting story, a bit of a Greek tragedy in some respects. I'm talking about the rise and fall of Milo Yiannopoulos, of course. The big story of the last couple of days leading into the Conservative Political Action Conference, from which Milo was to be the keynote speaker, to the chagrin of a lot of conservatives, and then had that invitation rescinded when interviews came to light that showed him indulging the rationalization of pedophilia. I mean, that's really what it was.
Yeah, that's what it was.
And Milo, in his press conference yesterday, you heard a clip at the top, announcing his resignation as the tech editor of Breitbart. In doing so, I thought in an adult way, being cognizant of the impact of others and how his employer stood by him, and it would be unfair to put his employer and those other employees through this and suffer the consequences of his poor choice of words, as he described it. So, why was Milo, is Milo, I mean, I don't think he's over. He's a man in his 30s. So there are, despite what F. Scott Fitzgerald said, there are second acts in America.
And he has been offered a job by Fusion. So,
but why is the provocateur like a Milo Yiannopoulos? Why does he have such cachet? Why is he so popular? Why is he someone who generated a $250,000 advance from Simon & Schuster for a book that has now also since been rescinded? We want to explore that question, but I also want to provide the apology that Milo offered in part for the comments that he made about sexual abuse of children.
But for those statements I did make where I misspoke, I'm here today to apologize. My experiences as a victim led me to believe that I could say almost anything on this subject, no matter how outrageous. But I understand that my usual blend of sassy, gay British sarcasm, provocation, and gallows humor might have come across as flippancy. A lack of care for other victims, or even worse, as seems to have been the case in reports, advocacy. I'm horrified by that impression. I would like to restate my disgust at adults who sexually abuse minors.
Where does Milo go from here, and what does his rise and fall, however temporary, say about the conservative movement and the figureheads for the rage against the totalitarian repression of free expression on places like college campuses? For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by one of the people that I put in my must-read column every day, one of the few people in that must-read column every day. It really is one of the most thoughtful conservative writers of our time. He is David French from National Review Online. David joins us now. David, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you. And so you've written a couple of pieces on Milo, and I just kind of want you to, state the thesis or theses of your pieces. One being that we have a bit of a free speech problem in Milo. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, what I meant by that is one of our biggest threats to free speech right now is the notion that people don't value it. They don't see the value in protecting it. And so, one of the things we see is in progressive corporations, conservative employees are silenced. You see a media that aggressively often silences conservative voices. And the government can't really do anything about that. And so what you have to do is you have to be able to persuade people that free speech is valuable. What Milo does is he tries to intentionally shock and to provoke and tries to intentionally make people angry. That's not something that is calculated to show people that free speech is valuable in the society. In fact, it's something that's actually calculated to do the opposite. He actually tries to make people censor him. He tries to make people shut him down because, it's something that brings him greater fame. That doesn't make him a champion of free speech. It makes him a provocateur. And those are different things. If if conservatives wanted to highlight the challenge of free speech, there's an awful lot of people who are completely reasonable, ethical, principled conservatives who've been shut down again and again on college campuses, who've lost their jobs because of their point of view when they're not trying to be provocative, and they're just sharing standard conservative thoughts or, traditional moral thoughts. And so in his situation, it was far more self-promotion, cloaking himself in the mantle of free speech, trying to shock just to get the outrage. And that's not how you're going to persuade people to value free expression in this country.
Do you think for some he was an embarrassment for the Republican Party and the conservative movement?
Well, yeah. I mean, he was kind of beyond an embarrassment. He was he is an intentionally cruel and malicious person. There was all of this attention paid to his comments about pedophilia, which were terrible and awful, and I take his apology at his word, but there's an awful lot of stuff that he's done that he's not apologized for, including he's a leading apologist for the alt-right, this really viciously racist movement that was unleashed in the 2016 presidential campaign that filled the internet with anti-Semitism. He would provoke online mobs to attack people in the most vicious and cruel manner possible. And excused it all as just, this is all hilarious. Well, one thing I did not find hilarious was seeing pictures of my 8-year-old daughter photoshopped into gas chambers with a Donald Trump in a Nazi uniform about to push the button, all because I had critiqued Donald Trump in the primary and in the general election. So that there's nothing funny about that. There's nothing good about that. And the idea that CPAC, knowing that he was that kind of person, would put him out there as a standard bearer of free speech in the conservative movement, I think was pretty appalling.
Yeah, I mean, I take your point on that, but I want to go back to something that you said at the outset on Milo and kind of, people that are silenced in private sector settings and feel like they can't share their views without repercussions, deleterious repercussions like the loss of a job or being ostracized in some way. And, Milo exists in the form that he exists because of the repression, the cultural repression that occurs. And so this is people seeing someone who they perceive to be somewhat fearless, taking on all of these, totalitarian thugs, to offer one description, and basically saying, you can't stop me. And that's somewhat empowering, maybe even so far as a guilty pleasure, isn't it?
Right. I think guilty pleasure is a great way to put it. He's a talented guy, and when he trains his sights on somebody, he's really able to deliver devastating takedowns. He's sort of like the Jon Stewart or John Oliver of the right, in the sense that you would see his YouTubes forwarding all around in conservative circles, watch Milo destroy this social justice warrior, watch him eviscerate this feminist. He's the same as you would see on Salon.com, watch John Oliver destroy Fox News. So this guilty pleasure, and I think that people are making the classic mistake of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's sort of the analysis, and that they were seeing that he was taking on people that they didn't like, and sometimes doing so in ways that humiliated them, and sort of making the mistake that he was their champion when he wasn't really. And I think that it's very understandable when you live in a situation, or you live in a circumstance in which you know that double standards are applied, that one rule applies to you that doesn't apply to others, that you have less freedom to speak than other people do around you. And that understandably builds resentment and anger. The real challenge, I think, in the conservative movement more broadly is how do you constructively channel that anger and resentment, and how do you constructively channel anger into upholding valuable principles and defending valuable ideals, as opposed to in this situation with Milo, which kind of turned into shock for the sake of shock.
And you offer some examples of where you can channel those energies into a productive place, people that would be better examples of fights that are worthwhile with respect to First Amendment rights and living in a free society more generally, like Barnell Stutzman, for example.
Right, exactly.
Develop that a bit for us.
Yeah, so there are people right now who are heroes of free speech in multiple ways. I mean, let's talk about Barronelle Stutzman, for example. She's a florist, a 72-year-old florist in Washington State, who's one of the kindest people you'll ever meet, who's being sued personally and by the state. The state is trying to seek to financially ruin her because she said that she couldn't, in good conscience, use her artistic talents to help celebrate a gay wedding, even though she immediately referred a gay couple to other florists who would help them. And even though she had served and employed gay people for years, she does not discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation, and now she stands on the brink of financial ruin for sticking by her principles. And throughout the entire fight, she has fought courageously. She's taking her case to the Supreme Court of the United States, and not once has she attacked another human being. Not once has she acted in a way that's cruel or malicious. And I also brought up the gentleman named Kelvin Cochran. He's a former fire chief in Atlanta who was fired because he had the audacity to publish a Christian book that stated a Christian view on sex and marriage and shared a copy of the book with a couple of people that he worked with. They just fired him summarily, violating all city procedures and policies in the way that they fired him. And again, you will not meet a finer gentleman, a braver man than Kelvin Cochran. This is one of the first African-American firemen in the Deep South who rose to become, one of the leading firemen in the United States. And it was all his career was tossed into the trash because of this oppressive political correctness. And again, this is a guy who's never been cruel or vicious to any other person, but at the same time has fought courageously. So if you want to respect people who fight, you don't also have to celebrate cruelty.
He is David French. He's a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom. He's a constitutional lawyer. He's a best-selling author, and he's a writer whose musings you can find at nationalreview.com. David French, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.